Marcus Thompson had always prided himself on being invisible. At 34, he'd perfected the art of blending into crowds, keeping his head down, and avoiding unnecessary conversations. It wasn't shyness, it was survival. For the past 8 years, invisibility had kept him alive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Riverside Market on Elm Street was his usual grocery store, chosen specifically because it was always busy enough that no one paid attention to individual customers. The afternoon rush meant long lines, distracted cashiers, and the perfect cover for someone who needed to remain unnoticed. Marcus grabbed a red plastic basket and began his weekly routine, methodically selecting items. Bread, milk, canned soup, frozen dinners. The kind of purchases that screamed ordinary bachelor. Nothing memorable. He'd been living in Portland, Oregon for 3 years now, longer than he'd stayed anywhere since leaving Chicago. The small apartment above the used bookstore felt almost like home, which made him nervous. Getting comfortable was dangerous. Comfort led to carelessness, and carelessness could get him killed. The produce section was crowded with evening shoppers. Marcus selected bananas and apples, keeping his movements casual while his eyes constantly scanned the store. Old habits never died. He noticed the security cameras, the exit locations, the blind spots between aisles. The middle-aged woman in aisle 3 had been behind him in production. Coincidence or surveillance? The man in the baseball cap near the pharmacy had glanced his way twice. Paranoia or prudence? Moving toward the cereal aisle, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Dr. Sarah Chen, his therapist from 2 years ago in Seattle, would have called this hypervigilance. She'd tried to convince him that not everyone was a threat, that his past didn't have to define his future. He'd stopped seeing her when she started asking too many questions about his background. Some wounds were too deep to heal, some secrets too dangerous to share. In the dairy section, he grabbed milk and yogurt, his reflection catching in the refrigerated glass. Brown hair, now darker than his natural sandy blonde. Brown contact lenses hiding his blue eyes. A carefully maintained beard that changed the shape of his face. Even his mother wouldn't recognize him now, if she were still alive to try. The weight of his wallet in his back pocket felt heavier than usual. Inside was his lifeline. An Oregon driver's license, social security card, credit cards, and bank card, all bearing the name Marcus Thompson. The identity had cost him $12,000 from a forger in San Francisco, but it was flawless. Marcus Thompson had a credit history, a rental history, even a library card. On paper, he was a perfectly ordinary citizen who'd lived an unremarkable life. But paper lies could only protect him for so long. As he moved through the store, Marcus's mind wandered to the phone call he'd received that morning. No voice, just breathing for 10 seconds before the line went dead. Wrong numbers happened, but in his world, there were no coincidences. He'd immediately packed a go bag, cash, fake passport, clean phone, and hidden it in his car trunk. Tonight, he'd make the final decision, stay in Portland and hope it was nothing, or disappear again. The checkout lines were long, exactly as he'd hoped. Marcus chose lane 7, staffed by a teenage cashier who looked bored and distracted. Perfect. He stood behind a woman buying diapers and baby food, using her as additional cover while he studied the store's interior once more. The man in the baseball cap was gone. The woman from aisle 3 was now in lane 4. His shoulders relaxed slightly. When his turn came, Marcus placed his items on the conveyor belt with practiced efficiency. The cashier, a kid named Tyler according to his name tag, began scanning without looking up. Bread, milk, soup cans. Each item beeped through the system. Marcus pulled out his wallet, ready to pay and disappear back into his carefully constructed anonymity. "That'll be $47.68, Tyler mumbled, still focused on his register. Marcus handed over his bank card, the same card he'd used hundreds of times over the past 3 years. The same name that had gotten him this apartment, this job, this life. The plastic felt normal in his fingers, familiar and safe. Tyler took the card and swiped it through the reader. The machine beeped its approval, but instead of handing the card back, the teenager paused. His eyes widened as he read the name on the plastic. The color drained from his face, and his hand began to tremble. "Oh my God," Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible over the store's background noise. You're him." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready to run. "I'm sorry?" Tyler looked up, his young face filled with recognition and something else. Fear? Excitement? "Marcus Thompson. You're Marcus Thompson." The words hit him like a physical blow. Someone knew. After 8 years of running, 3 years of perfect anonymity, a teenage grocery store cashier had somehow recognized him. But how? His appearance was completely different. His fingerprints weren't in any database. The only people who knew his real identity were either dead or had every reason to keep silent. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. He reached for the card, but Tyler pulled his hand back. No, I know it's you." Tyler's voice was getting louder, attracting attention from nearby customers. "I've been following your story for years. I can't believe you're here, in Portland. I mean, after everything that happened in Chicago." Chicago. The word hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Nobody was supposed to know about Chicago. The official records had been sealed, buried, destroyed. Everyone who could connect him to that night 8 years ago was either dead or had disappeared themselves. Yet somehow, this kid knew. Marcus glanced around frantically. Other customers were starting to stare. The woman in line behind him had pulled out her phone. In the security office, someone might already be rewinding footage, getting a clear shot of his face. His carefully constructed world was crumbling in real time. "You need to give me my card back," Marcus said quietly, leaning closer to Tyler. "Right now." But Tyler was already reaching for something under his register. The silent alarm that would bring security, or worse, the police. Marcus had seconds to decide. Cause a scene and fight for the card, or run and abandon 3 years of building this identity. The decision was made for him when Tyler's hand hit the alarm button. Red lights began flashing silently throughout the store, invisible to customers but unmistakable to staff. Security would arrive in less than 2 minutes. Marcus had to move. "Keep the card," he said, stepping backward. "It's not mine anyway." Tyler's confusion gave Marcus the few seconds he needed. He turned and walked quickly toward the nearest exit, not running. Running would draw attention, but moving with purpose. Behind him, he could hear Tyler calling out, trying to get someone's attention. The automatic doors seemed to take forever to open. Once outside, Marcus forced himself to maintain a normal pace across the parking lot to his car, a nondescript Honda Civic he'd bought with cash 2 years ago. His hands shook as he inserted the key, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking space. In his rearview mirror, he could see security guards emerging from the store, looking around the parking lot. One of them was talking into a radio. Marcus drove the speed limit toward the exit, every instinct screaming at him to floor the accelerator and disappear into traffic. As he turned onto Elm Street, one question burned in his mind. How did a teenage cashier in Portland know about Chicago? And, more importantly, who else knew he was here? Marcus drove through downtown Portland's evening traffic, his mind racing faster than his Honda Civic could safely navigate the busy streets. 20 minutes had passed since he'd fled Riverside Market, and he was already 3 neighborhoods away. But distance meant nothing if they had his face on camera. He pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on Morrison Street, choosing a spot near the back exit where his license plate couldn't be easily seen from the road. The neon sign flickered Mel's All-Night Eats in faded red letters. Inside, truckers and night shift workers hunched over coffee cups, the perfect crowd to disappear into while he figured out his next move. Sliding into a corner booth with a clear view of both entrances, Marcus ordered black coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd seen everything twice. His phone, a prepaid burner he replaced every 3 months, sat silent on the scratched Formica table. He stared at it, knowing he should call Jimmy Castellano in San Francisco, his only remaining contact from the old life. Jimmy owed him favors, big ones, but reaching out would confirm his location to anyone monitoring Jimmy's communications. The coffee arrived, bitter and lukewarm. Marcus wrapped his hands around the mug, trying to stop the trembling that had started in the grocery store parking lot. 8 years of careful planning, destroyed by a teenager with good memory and bad timing. His thoughts drifted back to that night in Chicago, the night that had turned him from Detective Michael Brennan into a ghost. The warehouse fire on the south side, the screams that still woke him at 3 a.m., the choice that had saved 12 lives but cost him everything he'd ever been. The official report called it an accident. The survivors knew better, and apparently so did Tyler. But how? The files were sealed federal evidence. The witnesses had been relocated or silenced. Even his own partner, Detective Lisa Rodriguez, had been transferred to Los Angeles with instructions never to speak about the case. Michael Brennan had died in that fire as surely as if the flames had consumed him too. Marcus pulled out a different phone, an ancient flip phone he kept for absolute emergencies, and dialed a number he'd memorized but never used. Public Library, Southeast Branch. A tired voice answered. "I need to speak to the Night Reference Librarian about a research project," Marcus said, using code words established years ago. "Hold, please." After 2 minutes of elevator music, a new voice came on the line, gruff, older, with a Brooklyn accent that sounded like home. "Jimmy here. Didn't expect to hear from you again, especially not from up north." "I've got a problem, Jim. Someone made me." A pause then. "Local law?" "Civilian. A kid who somehow knows about Chicago." Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "That's impossible. The whole thing was buried so deep it would take." Jimmy's voice cut off abruptly. "Jesus Christ, Mickey! Do you know what day it is?" Marcus frowned. "Thursday. Why?" "No, the date. Today's the 8th anniversary." The coffee mug slipped from Marcus's hands, hitting the table with a ceramic crack that drew stares from other customers. 8 years. He'd been so focused on survival, on staying invisible, that he'd lost track of the calendar. Every year on this date, the families held a memorial service. The media ran anniversary stories. And somewhere, someone always remembered Detective Michael Brennan, the cop who disappeared the same night 12 people died in a warehouse fire. "There's more," Jimmy continued. "Word came down through channels last week. Someone's been asking questions about the Chicago thing, offering serious money for information about surviving witnesses." "Who?" "Don't know yet, but they're not law enforcement. My guy says they're using private contractors, former military types. The kind you hire when you want people found quietly." Marcus felt the walls of the diner closing in. "How much do they know?" "Enough to know you didn't die in that fire. Enough to start looking for Michael Brennan. But here's the thing. They're looking for a dead cop, not a guy named Marcus Thompson living in Oregon." "Not anymore. The kid at the store knew both names." The silence stretched long enough that Marcus thought the connection had dropped. "Jimmy?" "Yeah, I'm here, just thinking." If some teenage cashier connected Michael Brennan to Marcus Thompson, either he's a lot smarter than you're giving him credit for, or someone fed him the information. The implications hit Marcus like cold water. Tyler hadn't stumbled across his identity through research or coincidence. Someone had told him exactly what to look for, exactly when to look for it. But why would they use a grocery store cashier as their trigger? "I need you to run the kid's background," Marcus said. "Tyler works at Riverside Market on Elm Street in Portland. Find out everything. Family, finances, connections." "Already on it. Give me 2 hours." Marcus ended the call and sat back in the cracked vinyl booth. Around him, the diner's late-night crowd continued their quiet conversations, oblivious to the fact that a man's entire existence was crumbling 3 feet away. The waitress refilled his coffee without being asked, her practiced indifference, a small comfort in a world where anonymity had become his most precious commodity. His watch showed 9:47 p.m. In less than 3 hours, he'd gone from grocery shopping to running for his life. Again, the go bag in his car contained everything he needed to disappear: cash, fake passport, clean credit cards, and a loaded Glock 19 he'd hoped never to use again. By morning, he could be in Vancouver, starting over with a new name, new life, new carefully constructed anonymity. But running meant leaving questions unanswered. Someone had found him, someone who knew enough about Chicago to piece together his new identity. They'd used Tyler as a messenger, a trigger to flush him out of hiding. The question was whether they wanted him alive or dead. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mel's Diner, corner booth, we need to talk." Marcus's blood froze. He looked around frantically, scanning faces, searching for anyone who seemed out of place. The truckers looked legitimate. The night shift workers seemed authentic. But in the back corner, near the restrooms, sat a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed familiar. She raised her hand slightly, a subtle wave, then stood and walked toward his booth. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed pistol under his jacket. But something about her approach, calm, non-threatening, almost sad, made him pause. "Hello, Michael," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "It's been a long time." Recognition hit him like a physical blow. Detective Lisa Rodriguez, his former partner, 8 years older, and carrying the weight of secrets in the lines around her eyes. The woman who'd been transferred to Los Angeles, who'd sworn never to speak about Chicago, who was supposed to have forgotten he ever existed. "Lisa," his voice came out as a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Trying to save your life, same as always." She signaled the waitress for coffee, her movements casual despite the tension radiating from every muscle. "Though you're not making it easy, using your real social security number for a fake identity, Jimmy always said you were too honest to be a good criminal. You've been watching me. For 3 years, ever since you settled in Portland." Lisa's coffee arrived, and she wrapped her hands around the mug in a gesture that mirrored his own nervous habit. "Someone had to make sure you stayed dead." "Then why blow my cover now? Why use the kid?" Lisa's expression darkened. "Because staying dead isn't an option anymore. They found the warehouse." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from an extinguished fire. Lisa Rodriguez watched Marcus's face drain of color as the implications sank in. The warehouse wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Officially, it had been demolished, and the site turned into a parking lot for a shopping center that was never built. "That's impossible," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The city condemned the entire block. Environmental cleanup, structural damage from the fire. All fabricated." Lisa pulled out a tablet from her purse and slid it across the table. The screen showed aerial photographs dated just 2 weeks ago. Construction crew doing foundation work for a new development found the lower level intact. Concrete and steel reinforcement kept it from collapsing, along with everything we left down there. Marcus stared at the images, his mind reeling. The basement level of the warehouse had been their command center during those final weeks of the investigation. Evidence boards, witness testimonies, financial records, everything that proved the Torino crime family had been using the building as a front for human trafficking operations. Evidence that would have sent dozens of people to prison for life if they'd lived long enough to testify. Who knows about this? Too many people. Lisa's fingers drummed nervously against her coffee cup. The construction foreman, the city inspector, and at least 3 reporters who were tipped off by someone with connections. And Vincent Torino's nephew, Anthony, who's been very interested in what Portland has to offer lately. The name hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Anthony Torino had been 19 when his uncle's empire collapsed in flames and federal raids. Now he'd be 27, old enough to have built his own organization, old enough to want revenge for the family business that had died with Vincent in that warehouse 8 years ago. How did they connect me to Portland? Lisa's expression grew grim. Facial recognition software. Anthony's people have been running the warehouse security footage through every available database. Your driver's license photo from 3 years ago was a 92% match to Detective Michael Brennan, close enough to start surveillance. And Tyler, Anthony's cousin, his real name is Anthony Torino Jr., been working at that grocery store for 6 months, waiting for you to show up. Lisa pulled up another photo on the tablet. Tyler's employee ID photo, next to a family portrait showing a younger version of him standing beside Vincent Torino at a Christmas party. Smart kid accepted early admission to Columbia Law School. His family thought placing him in your regular grocery store was poetic justice. Marcus felt sick. The teenager who'd seemed so genuinely shocked to recognize him had been playing a role, waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. Every casual grocery run for the past 6 months had been monitored, recorded, analyzed. So why warn me? Why not just let them take me? Because I know what really happened that night, Lisa's voice dropped to barely audible. I know you didn't kill Vincent Torino in cold blood like the family believes. I know you were trying to save those 12 people locked in the basement when the whole place went up. The memories came flooding back. The screams from below, the smoke filling the stairwells, the impossible choice between pursuing the fleeing criminals and getting the trafficking victims to safety. Marcus had chosen the victims, using his body to shield them from falling debris while Vincent Torino and his men escaped through tunnels that led to the river. The official report said Vincent died in the fire, but Marcus knew better. He'd seen the crime boss disappear into those tunnels just before the ceiling collapsed. "Vincent didn't die in the fire," Marcus said quietly. "No, he didn't, but his body was never found, so everyone assumed he had, including his family." Lisa leaned forward. "Until 2 weeks ago, when construction workers found his remains in a concrete vault 3 levels down, along with evidence that he'd been shot twice in the back of the head." Marcus's world tilted. "I never shot him. I never even saw him after he went into the tunnels." "I know, because I did." The confession hung between them like a loaded weapon. Lisa's hands were steady as she continued. "I followed them through the tunnels while you were getting the victims out. Vincent and 2 of his men made it to a boat on the river. They were going to disappear, start over somewhere else, keep trafficking kids in some other city." Her voice hardened. "I couldn't let that happen. Those 12 people you saved weren't the only victims. We'd found evidence of dozens more, kids who'd been sold, moved, disappeared forever." Marcus stared at his former partner, seeing her clearly for the first time in 8 years. The guilt he'd carried, the belief that he'd somehow failed to stop Vincent's escape, had been misplaced. Lisa had finished what the justice system couldn't. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were already blaming yourself for the whole thing. Adding my actions to your conscience would have destroyed you." She smiled sadly. "Besides, you were always the better cop. I figured if anyone deserved to live with a clean conscience, it was you." "And now?" "Now Anthony has the warehouse, Vincent's body, and enough circumstantial evidence to convince himself that Detective Michael Brennan executed his uncle. He doesn't know about me, doesn't know the real story. In his mind, you're the villain who destroyed his family." Marcus pulled out his phone and speed-dialed Jimmy's number. When the older man answered, Marcus put him on speaker. "Tell me you found something useful about our grocery store friend." "More than you want to know." Jimmy's voice crackled through the connection. "The kid's clean. No criminal record, good grades, normal life, until 6 months ago when his family paid him $50,000 to take a gap year and work retail in Portland. But here's the interesting part. They've been monitoring your credit card purchases, your daily routines, even your apartment building's security cameras." "How long until they move?" "According to my source, tonight. They figure you'll either run or go home, and they've got both locations covered." Lisa was already pulling cash from her wallet, enough to cover both their coffees and a generous tip. "We need to go, now." As they stood to leave, Marcus's mind was working through possibilities, escape routes, ways to disappear permanently. But Lisa had other ideas. "There's a third option," she said as they walked toward the diner's back exit. "We can end this." "How?" "By giving Anthony what he really wants, the truth about his uncle's death. And proof that Vincent Torino was a monster who deserved everything he got." They reached Lisa's car, a nondescript sedan that looked like every other rental in the parking lot. As she started the engine, Marcus realized that his 8 years of running were about to end one way or another. Either he'd spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, or he'd finally face the ghosts of Chicago. "The evidence room," Marcus said suddenly. If the warehouse basement survived, the evidence room survived too. Lisa smiled grimly. "Photos, testimonies, financial records proving Vincent's trafficking operation. Everything we need to show Anthony that his uncle wasn't a businessman. He was a predator who destroyed hundreds of lives." 20 minutes later, they stood outside a chain-link fence surrounding the construction site where the warehouse had once stood. Security lights illuminated the skeletal framework of excavation equipment and the dark opening that led to the basement levels. Lisa produced a pair of bolt cutters from her trunk, evidence of just how long she'd been planning for this moment. The chain-link fence parted with metallic snaps that echoed through the empty construction site. "The security guard makes rounds every 2 hours, she whispered. "We have 90 minutes before he's back." They descended through the excavated opening, flashlight beams cutting through darkness that smelled of concrete dust and old smoke. The basement level was exactly as Marcus remembered. Concrete walls, blackened by fire damage, but structurally intact. Emergency lighting had been installed by the construction crew, casting eerie shadows across what had once been their command center. The evidence room door stood ajar, its steel frame warped, but unbroken. Inside, filing cabinets had toppled, but remained sealed. Boxes of documents sat scattered across the floor, their contents protected by waterproof containers that had survived both fire and 8 years of neglect. "My God," Marcus breathed, kneeling beside a box labeled Victim Testimonies, Classified. Inside were dozens of video recordings, photographs, and written statements from survivors of Vincent's trafficking operation. Young faces stared out from Polaroid pictures, children who'd been bought, sold, and transported like cargo. Lisa was examining another box, her expression growing darker with each document she uncovered. Financial records showing payments to corrupt officials. Shipping manifests for cargo containers that were supposed to contain electronics but carried human beings instead. "Marcus, this is enough evidence to expose an entire network." Quote, a sound from above made them both freeze. Footsteps on the construction site, multiple sets moving with military precision. Lisa killed her flashlight and motioned for Marcus to do the same. In the sudden darkness, they could hear muffled voices drifting down through the opening. "Definitely went down there. Tire tracks show 2 vehicles and the fence has been cut recently. Anthony wants them alive. The old man's orders were specific. No bullets unless absolutely necessary." Marcus recognized the second voice with a chill. Vincent's brother, Salvatore Torino, now in his 60s, but still commanding the family's operations. The man who'd taught Anthony Jr. to hate the name Michael Brennan, who'd spent 8 years planning this moment of revenge. "We need another way out," Lisa whispered, her hand already moving toward the service weapon concealed under her jacket. Marcus grabbed her wrist. "No! No more killing, Lisa. These people deserve the truth, not more violence. The truth won't stop them from putting bullets in our heads." "Maybe it will." Marcus stood up, his decision made. "Anthony Jr. isn't like his uncle. I saw it in his eyes at the grocery store. He's angry, not evil. There's a difference." Before Lisa could stop him, Marcus called out toward the ceiling. "Anthony, I know you're up there. Come down here and see what your uncle really was." The footsteps stopped. After a long moment, voices argued in rapid Italian. Then came the sound of someone descending into the basement, multiple flashlight beams sweeping the darkness. Anthony Jr. appeared first, no longer wearing his grocery store uniform. Instead, he was dressed in an expensive suit that made him look older, more dangerous. Behind him came 2 men with the cold eyes of professional killers. And finally, Salvatore Torino himself, a man Marcus had seen only in surveillance photographs 8 years ago. "Detective Michael Brennan," Salvatore said, his accented English precise and formal. "You are a difficult man to kill." "Because good people have been protecting me," Marcus replied, stepping into the light. "People who know what really happened here 8 years ago." "What happened," Anthony Jr. said, his young voice shaking with controlled rage, "is that you murdered my uncle and destroyed my family's business." "Your family's business was slavery," Marcus gestured to the scattered evidence boxes. "Take a look around, Anthony, see what Vincent really was." Quote. The young man's eyes flicked toward the open boxes, the scattered photographs, the damning documents that painted a picture of systematic horror. But Salvatore stepped forward, blocking his view. "Lies," the older man said firmly. "Police fabrications designed to justify their persecution of our family." Lisa emerged from the shadows, her weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. "I was there that night, Anthony. I was Detective Brennan's partner. Do you want to know how your uncle really died?" "We know how he died," one of the gunmen said. "Shot in the back while trying to escape the fire this man started." "Shot in the back, yes," Lisa continued, her voice steady, "but not by Michael, by me. I followed Vincent through the tunnels to the river. I watched him board a boat with $2 million in cash and a list of contacts in Southeast Asia where he planned to continue trafficking children." Anthony Jr.'s face went pale. "You're lying." "Am I?" Lisa nodded toward one of the evidence boxes. "Check the shipping records. Look at the financial transfers. Your uncle wasn't just running numbers and protection rackets. He was buying and selling human beings. Children, Anthony. Kids younger than you were when this all happened." Salvatore's hand moved toward his jacket, but Marcus stepped between him and Lisa. "The truth isn't going to disappear just because you kill us," Marcus said. "The construction workers already found Vincent's body. The reporters are already asking questions." In 24 hours, this whole story will be front-page news, whether we're alive or dead. Then we make sure the story says what we want it to say, Salvatore replied coldly. But Anthony Jr. was moving toward the evidence boxes, his curiosity overcoming his uncle's commands. He picked up a photograph. A young girl, maybe 14, with terror in her eyes and a price tag written on the back in Vincent's handwriting. "Uncle Sal," Anthony said quietly, "what is this?" "Police evidence, fabricated to frame your uncle." Anthony picked up another photo, then another. Each one showed a different victim, a different price, a different destination. The shipping manifests told the same story. Human cargo disguised as legitimate imports, moving through ports that Vincent controlled. "These aren't fabricated," Anthony said, his voice breaking. "I recognize the handwriting. I've seen Uncle Vincent's ledgers from legitimate businesses." This is his writing, quote, Salvatore's mask of calm finally cracked. "Anthony, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." The young man stood up, the photograph still clutched in his hands. "My uncle wasn't a businessman. He was a monster. And you've been lying to me about it for 8 years. The two gunmen looked uncertainly between Salvatore and Anthony, unsure whose orders to follow. In that moment of confusion, Marcus saw his opportunity. "There's security camera footage too," he said. "Hidden cameras Vincent installed to monitor his operations. The feeds were stored on servers in the basement." "Everything is still here, Anthony. Every transaction, every victim, every moment of your uncle's real business." Anthony Jr. turned to face Marcus, and for the first time his expression wasn't filled with hatred. Instead, there was something that looked almost like gratitude. "Detective Brennan," he said formally, "my family owes you an apology. And Detective Rodriguez, you did what the law couldn't do. You stopped a monster." Salvatore raised his weapon, his face twisted with rage. "Enough! Vincent was family. Family protects family, no matter what." But Anthony was faster, knocking his great-uncle's gun arm aside just as the shot echoed through the basement. The bullet struck concrete instead of flesh, and in the confusion that followed, Lisa had her service weapon trained on both remaining gunmen. "It's over, Salvatore," Anthony said quietly. "The old ways, the lies, the revenge, it's all over. I won't let the Torino name be associated with trafficking anymore." As sirens wailed in the distance, Lisa had apparently called for backup before they'd entered the warehouse. Marcus realized that his 8 years of running had finally come to an end, not through violence or more lies, but through the simple power of truth. Tyler, Anthony Jr., extended his hand to the man he'd spent months hunting. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saving me from becoming him." And for the first time in 8 years, Michael Brennan shook hands with someone who knew exactly who he was and was grateful for it. The police arrived 15 minutes later, led by FBI agent Sarah Chen, the same woman who had been Marcus's therapist in Seattle, though he now realized her sessions had been part of a larger investigation into surviving members of the Torino organization. She surveyed the basement scene with professional detachment, taking note of the surrendered weapons, the subdued gunmen, and the mountains of evidence scattered across the concrete floor. "Detective Brennan," she said formally, though her eyes held warmth, "we've been looking for you for quite some time." "I thought you were a therapist." "I am. FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. My assignment was to monitor your psychological state and determine if you posed a threat to ongoing investigations." She smiled slightly. "I'm pleased to report that you don't." Salvatore Torino was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of defeated rage. The two gunmen followed, their heads down and spirits broken, but Anthony Jr. remained in the basement, helping to catalog evidence that would put dozens of human traffickers behind bars for life. "There's something else," Anthony said, approaching Marcus as crime scene technicians photographed the evidence. "Uncle Vincent kept records of everyone he worked with, officials he bribed, law enforcement he corrupted, judges who looked the other way. This evidence doesn't just expose him. It exposes an entire network." Lisa looked up from a box of financial records, payments to a police captain in Chicago, a customs official in Long Beach, even a federal prosecutor in Miami. "This goes all the way to the top." Agent Chen nodded grimly. "We've been building cases against these individuals for years, but we never had concrete proof. This evidence changes everything." As the basement filled with federal agents and evidence technicians, Marcus found himself thinking about the 12 people he'd saved 8 years ago. Where were they now? Had they found peace? Had they built new lives free from the horrors Vincent Torino had inflicted upon them? "Detective," Anthony Jr. called out, holding up a thick folder. "You should see this." Marcus approached the young man, who had found a file labeled Witness Protection, Active Cases. Inside were recent photographs and status reports on the 12 trafficking victims Marcus had rescued. All alive, all safe, all living under new identities in cities across the country. "They made it," Marcus whispered, studying faces that had haunted his dreams for 8 years. "They all made it." "Because of what you did that night," Anthony replied, "because you chose to save them instead of pursuing my uncle." As dawn broke over Portland, Marcus Thompson ceased to exist. In his place stood Detective Michael Brennan, no longer a fugitive but a key witness in what would become the largest human trafficking prosecution in FBI history. The grocery store incident that had shattered his carefully constructed anonymity had instead led to justice for hundreds of victims and the dismantling of a criminal network that spanned 3 continents. Anthony Torino Jr. would testify against his own family, helping prosecutors understand the inner workings of an organization he'd been groomed to inherit. His testimony would be crucial in convicting over 40 individuals involved in the trafficking operation. 6 months later, Marcus sat in a federal courtroom in Chicago, watching as the final defendant in the Torino case received a life sentence. Lisa Rodriguez sat beside him, no longer his former partner but his current one. They'd been assigned to a joint FBI Chicago PD task force dedicated to combating human trafficking. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions about the warehouse hero who had emerged from 8 years in hiding to expose a massive criminal conspiracy. Marcus ignored them, walking toward a car where Tyler, who had reclaimed his real name Anthony, waited with acceptance letters to 3 law schools. "Columbia still wants me," Anthony said, grinning. "Apparently, helping the FBI take down a crime family looks good on a resume." "What will you study?" Marcus asked. "Prosecutorial law, victim advocacy. Someone needs to make sure what happened to those 12 people never happens again." As they drove through downtown Chicago, past the empty lot where the warehouse had once stood, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him full circle. A simple grocery store transaction had unraveled 8 years of carefully maintained lies, but it had also revealed 8 years of carefully maintained truth. He was no longer Marcus Thompson, an invisible man living in the shadows. He was Detective Michael Brennan, and his story was far from over. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.